okay, if that was like a little kid or a little dog or something different, something less threatening, so to speak, as you perceive it to be. And I agree with that. And like I said, I've wrote notes because I don't want to miss anything. I don't want our watchers to miss anything. Again, if you have a question or comment, 915-5202. My response was that systematic racism affects African Americans differently than any other race. Racism oppresses Black people in almost every American system. Asking for justice for all races within systems uniquely designed to oppress Black people is not helpful and can actually be counterproductive.
When you were talking about Michelle Alexander, and who is the author of The New Jim Crow, I immediately thought about a token that I've coined, from character to commodity, because the African American community, especially Black men, have been reduced from a character to commodity. They are big business. The prisons are plantations, and once you become a felon, then you are denied privileges of sustainability. Then you get out of prison, you can't go live with your family if they happen to be in public housing, and so now there's a breakdown of the family. You cannot secure employment, and so now you have this situation to deal with. Do I eat? And how do I feed myself? How do I feed my children? And so now you're creating the beast that you are afraid of. You're creating these monsters systematically. And then when you deal with recidivism, because ultimately, unfortunately, you will commit a crime. Statistics show that, but it's not that you choose to be criminal, you choose to survive. And so in that paradigm and dealing with that reality, now you are back in the penitentiary, a repeat offender, etc., and so on. And so now you have this label that leaves you helpless in terms of just trying to do for yourself, unless someone treats you as if you are the beneficiary of some form of charity.
And it's a good thing that you said that, because I wanted to read that, because one of the things we always hear is about the 13th Amendment. Let me make it clear what the 13th Amendment actually says. It says, do you even know what the 13th Amendment says? The question is not an insult. This is exactly what the 13th Amendment of the Constitution says. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have duly been convicted, shall exist within the United States. So basically what the 13th Amendment says, that as long as you don't commit a crime, we cannot put you back into slavery. Once you commit a crime, you are now a slave under the United States Constitution.
And that's
exactly what it says.
And that's amazing. That's very profound. And I don't think that oftentimes we, and I take ownership of this, and that's why I'm so very serious about the work that I do concerning social justice, and that's why I describe it as the urban Serengeti, because it is a concrete jungle, and you are dealing with people who have been created to be animals, and they are operating in certain zones and zip codes that are perceived as violent, that are perceived as high crime areas, etc., and so on. But that's the purpose of projects. You have these control groups, whereas if you take resources from people, education, why do our children have to play in sandboxes filled with spent prophylactics and syringes and broken Johnny Walker bottles? Why do our children have to go buy Chico sticks and Snickers bars through bulletproof glass? Why are we teaching our children in the beginning that they are a threat to society, that they are a menace to society? Why, when it comes down to, even in the movies, criminals are always us, and then you look at the war on drugs, the war on drugs
was war on
which
us.
Was a myth, exactly, was a myth, and it was a war on us, because in that, when you deal with how that came into be, you start looking at, again, imaging and branding. Suddenly we saw Losing Isaiah, suddenly we saw New Jack City, suddenly we saw Pookie and all of that, and then the crack epidemic, was always us, when statistics show that Black folk are not the primary abusers of substances. Black folk are not the primary recipients of welfare. Black folk are not the primary recipients of Section 8. However, based on branding, we are the face of that.
So with that being said, okay, one of the things that I encourage my brothers and my sisters that are out there doing stupid things, before you turn around and do a stupid thing, because one of the things that we hear this new age generation go, I'll never be no slave. They could never make me no slave. Once per the 13th Amendment, you commit a crime, you are a slave, you are property of the United States government, and they will do with you what they want, when they want, and how they want. A perfect example, this is why you have parole officers, but your parole office is some godly place that you can't get to in the hope that they can violate you for not showing up. Okay, like you said, jobs non-existent, okay, where we keep getting all of these people to post all of these lists about people who hire felons just to make themselves look good. Right. But the reality is the list is this big, but the opportunities are actually this big. This systematic thing of the sagging your pants and anything one of the things that we talked about on the show when we talked about white privilege is anything that starts to affect that persuasion and their children becomes an issue, because young African American men have foolishly been walking around with their pants hanging off of their behinds for God knows however. Once it's spilled over into other nationalities, now we have laws. We have McDonald's putting up a sign that says you can't come in here with your pants hanging down like here. We have restaurants, we have stores and everything else, but now our very own people have sold us down the river because now they've made it a fashion statement. So now they've made pants that actually automatically sag one way or the other. No one says to these young brothers, hey young man, when you get 40 years old, your freaking spine is going to be messed up because trying to walk like a duck, holding your pants up at the same time is causing more men curvatures of their spine. So again, here's a system that's been designed to utilize against us.
Frederick Douglass said that it's better to build strong children than to repair broken men. And so when we deal with systemic genocide and we deal with the byproducts thereof, which are these young brothers out here now lacking a sense of self, lacking a sense of identity, and unfortunately the images that we promote, the Lil Waynes, the Rick Rosses, wherever they come from, they have been used against us because those are the people that our young brothers want to grow up and be like. They don't want to be W.B. Du Bois. They're not trying to be Marcus Garvey. They're not trying to be the Patrice Lumumbas. They're not trying to be Thurgood Marshalls. They're not trying to be Barack Obamas. They want to be what their image of success is, and that's because we promote success to look like this for the black community, whereas in other communities that's not how they promote success. And in that, what I would like to point out is something very simple, because we're a communal people. We're very family oriented. When we had a show back in the day called Good Times, you know, they didn't have much, but they had each other, but they didn't go out and steal. They had a strong male role model in the family. You know, the women were respected. The children understood that they had to grow into the responsibility of family themselves. But when James Evans died on the show, everything went crazy. And so Good Times was replaced somehow with the Huxtables, something so very distant from our reality that it was more painful than it was constructive, because we said we can never do that. And we didn't have systems in place to ensure that we could. Absolutely. I agree. And so W.B. Du Bois says it's double consciousness. We have internalized an image that other folk have put on us. And so now we are not acting out of our own anointing or eminence. We are acting out of an expectation of who you expect me to be. And it's so crazy to me, for example, when I see people walk down the street, especially Europeans, unfortunately, we just got to keep it real. When I, as a black man, am walking down the street, I'm in grad school right now, I'm not thinking about committing a crime at all. I'm walking down the street in the same 501s that anybody else is. For you to lock your doors, for you to cross the street as if I'm a pit bull with rabies off a leash, as if I am posing a threat, then that offends me. And I think about James Baldwin. He has a poem, and in a poem he talks about simultaneously approaching a bus stop at the same time with a Caucasian woman, and she clutches her purse, and the poem is called Far Greater Reasons. Now in that, the point of it all was that he has far greater reasons to be scared of her than she ever has to be scared of him, lest we be reminded of Emmett Till.
And Okay, a good point. And in talking about that, one of the things that really, really broke my heart is they put up, Whoopi Goldberg put up that she was going to do a movie about Emmett Till. And everybody said, who? And then Jay-Z said, I'm going to do a movie about Emmett Till. And they was like, that's what's up. I don't know who this Emmett Till guy is. And I'm like, wow. And what floored me is during the hiatus, I launched a t-shirt line called Classic Beauties. And I do all of the beauties. And I was like floored. One of the things I do is when you buy a t-shirt, you get a history card because I have the classic. I got so tired of seeing sisters walking around with Marilyn Monroe on their chest as if like that's the only beauty. So what and so my first shirt was Dorothy Dandridge. And so many people said, well, she's pretty, but who's that? And I'm like, wow, this has blown me away. And one of the questions that callers that called in and said, well, I know y'all talking about slavery, but the Holocaust was just as bad. And I'm like, look, dude, genocide is genocide. Okay, there's not one greater than the other. Right. But one thing that I will tell you is you can pick up a history book and read 14 pages on the Holocaust, but you can't pick up a history book in the United States of America and read about the transatlantic slave trade.
Not in the classroom.
Not in the classroom. Okay, and so when you talk about that, one of the things that I've done and I continue to do with my nieces and my nephews and my son and my mother and them did with us is there's a difference between history and his story. And you have to know the difference. Okay, one of the biggest jokes of the world is that black people don't read. We don't read books. We have to go out and go beyond the veil, so to speak, beyond what's put in front of us. You know, that would be just like me putting a pile of crap on the table and say, you know, that's really whipped up steak.
It's interesting that you talk about reading. I like to read. I've been encouraged to read by my parents and all kind of other people. One letter that I read in particular, and it wasn't a poem by Langston Hughes. It was not a classified in any particular news paper. It was a letter to Willie Lynch. And in that letter to Willie Lynch, there was a description as to how Willie Lynch would share with people, and I believe it was here, but it would share with people how you can systematically and psychologically enslave or traumatize the black community. And what they would do, they would take a black man, the biggest, the strongest, the most defiant, the most looked up to, and they would tie him to horses. They would stretch him out. They would tar and feather him. And then they would slap the horses so that he would get pulled apart right in front of the women, right in front of the children. So at that point now you have a psychological divide because the children are no longer looking at the black men as a form of protection because now they are turning to their mother. And so now the men are less significant. In the military, you know, instead of when I was in the military, the United States Army, I learned while we were out on field exercises that it was not necessary to use machine guns. It was not necessary to use nuclear munitions to win the war. You simply had to cut off the water supply because if you cut off the water supply, bacteria settled in. If you cut off the water supply, there was a hygiene issue. If you cut off the water supply, you see you were going to die anyway. It was just a matter of time. And so that's what we're dealing with. And even in the letter to Willie Lynch, I think about the movie Crash. Crash had a scene in there where Terrence Howard was sitting on the curb. The police was frisking his girlfriend. And she looked at him.
Like, aren't you going
to do anything?
Aren't you going to help
now,
me?
Terrence Howard, now we're keeping Ferguson in mind. Terrence Howard, we're thinking Rodney King in mind. Terrence Howard, we're keeping all of that in mind. He understood that if he stood up to defend her, neither one of them might have gotten out of that situation. So he had to humble himself and sit there. But she could not understand that because she was the one being violated. Much to the parallel of back in the days of slavery. If you are my wife, and Master decided he wanted to come in, have his way with you in front of me and the children. If indeed I stood up, the children would not have a father, you would not have a husband. There's a problem with that. Billie Holiday described it as strange fruit. She said, trees don't bear men. This is some strange fruit. Why are they swinging from trees? So this is a very real issue in America, and for America not to acknowledge it is a problem. And America has even gone so far as to, we have images of Jesus all over the place, blonde hair and blue eyes. Now, I just have to ask the question, how do you hide in Egypt amongst black people if you have blonde hair and blue eyes? It seems that would be me hiding in Chinatown. You would stand out.
The funny thing about that, when we